today's class, our one reading was Body Ritual Among the Nacirema. It was written in 1956. So we should always keep that in mind whenever we read a study about other people, that, you know, this was written 66 years ago. So we have to, you know, the things that the Nacirema were doing back then in the 1950s may not be the same things that the Nacirema are doing exactly right now. So we always have to keep that in mind. But that said, this has become a kind of classic article in anthropology. As we talked about in the last class, it's kind of a classic test of how strange people can be and what we will think about them when confronted with this level of strangeness. So in your quizzes, I asked you for what was the strangest thing that you saw, and what you might also say is like our own society. So we'll start with the strangest things, and I may call on some of you and ask you to talk about what you found so strange. So the first thing that kind of pops out at us are these shrines that they have in their houses. All the shrines on page 503 and all the things that they do in these shrines. Juliana, you were struck by something that they did that was kind of strange.
They said that like the women like bake their heads in ovens.
The head baking in ovens, yes. Several of you talked about that, the baking of heads in ovens. And some of you, I thought also you mentioned that the men are lacerating, scraping their faces with sharp instruments. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Let's see, what else do they do that's fun? Nicole, you talked about the Holy Mouth Men. What is this person? What do they do? Drilling holes in people's teeth, and so several of you mentioned there's this peculiar fascination with the mouth and trying to keep the mouth intact and the teeth intact, and they keep going back to this person even though their teeth keep decaying. They go every 6 months, every year, but they still have problems with their teeth even though they keep doing all these weird things to them. And then there's this place called the Latipso. One of you had a good description of that. Let's see. Chuck. Yes. Evan, you had a good description of Latipso. What was that like?
It was a temple where the sick people sent to really sick, but they have to be have to give up like a very generous gift in order to be admitted.
You have to give up a generous gift just to get in. Yeah. And all right, there's those baking heads that comes up there. So several of you mentioned, a little strange there. And then one of you talked about the listener. There's this other person who's like kind of, you have to tell all your trials and tribulations to, and talk about your mother and those kinds of things. And then a couple of you talked about this paragraph where they have, this was on page 506. There are ritual fasts to make fat people thin and ceremonial feasts to make thin people fat. Still other rites are used to make women's breasts larger if they are small and smaller if they are large. General dissatisfaction with breast shape is symbolized in the fact that the ideal form is virtually outside the range of human variation. A few women afflicted with almost inhuman hypermammary development are so idolized that they make a handsome living by simply going from village to village and permitting the natives to stare at them for a fee, which is strange. All right, so I also asked, what is this like? What might we think that the US Americans were doing, or people in the United States were doing in the 1950s, especially, or is most like our own society? So if we think about what the people were doing in those shrines, and we think about what we do in our own bathrooms, and fortunately, I have to wear masks, so you can't see any shaving cuts that I might have inflicted upon myself while I was lacerating myself with a sharp instrument and scraping at it. But, you know, there's a whole series of things that we do. And fortunately, it's been a while since we actually used hog's hair for our toothbrushes. We now have some sort of weird plasticky stuff, or for those of you who are being more environmentally friendly, we make them out of good stuff again. But yes, and back in the day, they actually did use toothbrushes made out of hog's hairs. And let's see, the holy mouth man. It resembles something, Nick. Who would the holy mouth man resemble, kind of resembles a dentist, right? Drilling holes in people's teeth and jacking them all up on various substances and putting things in there. It's just a little bit like a dentist. And then somebody said, Jacob, what's the similarity between the Latipso offering and what we have to do today? A lot of people struggle to pay for health care. They try and stay out of that hospital at any cost, right? In fact, they don't have enough money to be in there. And if you don't have good insurance, you don't want to be messing around with that, because you know what it's like. It's hard out there, right? Lots of ritual offerings, and you go in there, and then somebody makes you take a urine sample and makes you do all this stuff and prods you and pokes you, and you don't know if they're going to make you better. These days, you go to the hospital, it might be the last time. So, you know, trying to stay out of there. Let's see, baking heads. Huh. I remember, maybe you don't, those shows back in the 1950s where all the women would go in and they had those things that came down over their head like that. And, you know, hair hot, all that heat on their hair, which was, you know, beauty salons back then. If I think of Miner were writing this today, you'd find rather interesting that some people choose to go to these places and bake their whole bodies to try and change their skin tone. Or actually, Veronica, you had an interesting example, I thought, of different kinds of things that people do with their hair sometimes. What do people do with their hair now? Might be comparable to baking it or somewhat like that. Yeah, I was impressed by the boiling water to make the ends get together. I did not know that. It sounds a little dangerous, but yeah, some elaborate ideas to get the hair right. It often happens. Let's see. The listener. Wait, Seth, who does a listener resemble?
Therapist.
A therapist. And, you know, it may not be like today's therapist, because back in the 1950s, they were way into psychoanalysis, you know, those old things where you'd lie on a couch and talk about your mom and all the things that were done to you and your toilet training habits and all those things. Now, fortunately, we have therapists and we can get little pills that we can, you know, we don't have to tell them all our troubles. We can get things that can balance us out, get give a person a little prescription and they can feel better. Now, so let's see. We also, let's see. Oh, that person's not here. We can also change our appearance, or I mean, we often, as some of you said, we do often try to change our appearance with surgeries and have different kinds of diets and making ourselves bulking up our muscles or trying to lose weight. And then the hypermammary, some people are so idolized that they can go around from place to place and make money from bearing their bodies. Maybe down at a place on Main Street, which you should probably stay away from at any cost, but you know, yeah, nobody does that anymore. So, I don't know, did this start to dawn on people at some point? What Miner is doing to us? Yeah, eventually it does, right? Eventually you're like, you know, something's going on there. He's putting us on. Yes, indeed. The Nacirema is American, spelled backwards for a reason, because all of these things are as if he looked at US society in the 1950s and described it as if it were some weird, objectively strange place. He gives you a couple different clues. I couldn't tell how many of you were figuring it out right in the middle of things. One of the clues is, of course, where they are. They're between Canada and Mexico. And then there's this weird story, which is their nation was originated by a culture hero, Nigsaw, who is otherwise known for two great feats of strength: the throwing of a piece of wampum across the river Potomac, and the chopping down of a cherry tree in which the spirit of truth resided. So that was some myth that we're taught about George Washington back in the day. So yeah, I mean, he gives us, as some of you pointed out, the highly developed market economy. So they're supposed to be, I guess, funny, high comedy, something. It's supposed to prod us into thinking about our own society, but also how we think about others. And I believe there is some enduring relevance to the Nacirema. I mean, Miner was certainly onto something. One of the things he was onto is placebos, and how when you give people a pill, it really makes a huge difference if you believe that it's going to help you. If you believe it's going to help you, there's a huge difference in what it can do for you. And that applies to even things like antidepressants. Back in the day, about 20 or 30 years ago, if you gave people a sugar pill and said, this will help you, nobody believed it because nobody believed these things existed. Now we know that they can work. And so actually the placebo effect has increased. We can actually sometimes, they do studies where you can give people sugar pills versus the medicine, and sometimes it can have a good effect just because you believe it. So it's an interesting analysis of the medical studies. He also certainly understood that for much of society, our ideals about what the human body should be, we can't even realize those ideals. In the 1950s, they were coming out with those Barbies, right? Those very famous dolls. And some people have done studies that if you took a Barbie doll and you sort of blew her up to real life proportions, that it wouldn't even hold the necessary organs that females have. So Barbies are, I mean, we often have ideals in our society about what we're trying to get to that that we can't even reach, that are outside of our abilities. And now I think that's even become true for males as well. We have these ideas of attaining the six-pack of abs and always going to the gym, virtually unattainable, at least for some people. So it's been very difficult to get some of these things to happen. I have to say that reading this in the middle of COVID makes, for me, the sentence on page 507 a little bit scary. It is hard to understand how they, the Nacirema, have managed to exist so long under the burdens which they have imposed upon themselves. They are a magic-ridden people. I think about that when I hear about the people who are going off and dosing themselves with all kinds of different things because, you know, somebody said it would work. We're a magic-ridden people. And it also made me wonder about the mouths and all these people who are going all crazy about having to wear a mask and protesting this and protesting that. Is it because our society is so fascinated with the mouth that we're all weirded out by having to cover it up? I put a question mark there because I'm not sure, but I'm sure that it would be interesting to wonder if at least Miner's diagnosis was that American society had a peculiar fascination with the mouth. We needed to see teeth. So now nobody can see my wonderful dental work and all the orthodontist stuff that I had to straighten out my teeth and make them all pretty. So I have to wear this mask all the time. So I wonder if that has to do with the things that we have. His enduring point, or his, you know, the things that he's trying to do, and I hope that we're starting to get out of it, is to always be careful when we're looking at other societies, because the things that they do that might seem strange to us or might be perfectly logical within their own society, and the things that we do or in American society that might seem perfectly normal and natural to us may look very different or strange from the outside. So this is our classic test of cultural relativism and ethnocentrism, turning the lens for a little bit back upon us.